30 seconds and counting. We have completed our communications checks with the Apollo 8 astronauts in the cabin, and the communications are go. Coming up shortly, we'll be in the automatic sequence where we have a completely automatic checkout of the launch vehicle from 3 minutes and 6 seconds down. We have firing command. The firing command is in. We are now on the automatic sequence, T-minus 3 minutes and counting. During this period, once we do get the firing command, the various tanks within the 3 stages of the Saturn V launch vehicle begin to pressurize. They all must be under pressure before we're ready to launch. We have a sequence status board here in the control room that will give us readouts on the overall status of the space vehicle as we reach the terminal phases in the countdown. Now, 2 minutes, 32 seconds, and counting. Our status board indicates that all aspects are ready. Instrument unit is ready, spacecraft ready. Final check of the emergency detection system, that ready light also on. First stage preparations are completed. 2 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. The tanks continuing to pressurize in the vehicle. Not as many reports coming now as we all stand by on the launch vehicle test conductor's channel. Coming up on the 2-minute mark on the Apollo 8 mission. 2 minutes and counting. T-minus 2 minutes and counting. We are still proceeding. We now have recorded that the first stage liquid oxygen tank has been pressurized and the pressure's still building up. 1 minute, 45 seconds and counting. We have a vehicle weighing 6.2 million pounds on the pad. Interestingly enough, some 1,200 pounds of that weight is just frost on the side of the vehicle created by the extremely low temperatures of the propellants. Coming up on 90 seconds, mark, T-minus 90 seconds and counting. The Apollo 8 crew standing by, spacecraft commander Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, Bill Anders. We now have a report that the liquid hydrogen tank on the 3rd stage is pressurized. 1 minute, 15 seconds. All 3rd stage propellants pressurized at this time as we come up on the 60-second mark on a flight to the moon. T-minus 60 seconds and counting. T-minus 60 seconds and counting. The vehicle now is completely pressurized. We're coming up on a power transfer shortly. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. We have the power transfer. We're now on the flight batteries within the launch vehicle. 45 seconds. Final reports coming from Frank Borman at this time. Final look at the switch list aboard the spacecraft. 35 seconds and counting. We'll lead up to an ignition sequence start at 8.9 seconds. This will lead up, as we build up the thrust, to a liftoff. If all goes well, it's 0. We've just passed the 25-second mark in the count. 20 seconds, all aspects. We are still go at this time.
Launch release, are you ready?
T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engines are armed. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
It looks good. It looks like a good flight. It's a beautiful takeoff so far. This building is shaking under us. Our camera platform is shaking. But what a beautiful flight. Man, perhaps on the way to the moon, if all continues to go well.
Fido, flight, how are you?
We're go, flight, right on.
EECOM?
Looking good, flight.
GNC?
We're good, flight. Booster?
Go, flight.
Okay, Capcom, we look good.
All right, you're looking good.
Yeah, really, flight. Roger on the cabin. Flight Fido, trajectory go.
And we're
Roger,
a mile
Fido.
and a half mile into
How
the
you,
sky
booster?
and
Right there,
about,
flight.
nearly 4 miles downrange.
Now hearing the voice of Paul Haney at Mission Control in Houston. And the great BU cameras are picking up the spacecraft.
1 minute 4.
Guidance flight out here. Looks good, flight.
looks
Real
great.
good. Okay. Stand by for 1 Charlie.
Now in 15 seconds,
Mark,
the
1
inboard
Charlie.
engine should cut off
Charlie, Apollo 8.
in that first stage.
Staging status booster. Go flight
One inboard
Fido.
engine and then
Go flight guidance.
Into the mission, and
Guidance flight.
Frank
Go
Borman has
flight.
confirmed
Staging status.
each
We're go.
event as
Go
it's
for
been
staging,
passed
Captain.
by
Apollo
Mike
8, Houston,
Collins.
you are
Board out,
for
flight.
staging, over.
Inboard out flight.
The crew
Copy.
has been
Inboard
given
out. About on
close to
time.
staging.
Right.
Inboard out on time, Frank Borman
How you
says.
come?
25 more
The
seconds.
inboard
Very
The
good,
other
flight. Stay a little
four
north.
engines of the
GNC,
first stage should
we're
cut
good,
out.
flight.
And the
That work, you get that CP back in? But checking flight. Okay.
rocket then will be 20 miles high and going 3,000 miles an hour.
ETO 2 minutes, flight. Okay. S1C cutoff.
And there is the
Roger.
staging.
S2 ignition. Roger, S2.
S2 has ignited.
All engines good?
Hey,
PU shift. Thrust looks good, flight. All engines. Roger.
Thrust looks good. All engines, all sources show the second stage is burning perfectly.
They
2
had their
minutes, 51 seconds into the mission.
They had their fingers crossed for that one. It was 2 of the engines that failed on the second stage in the second flight of
The flight train safety console has been released at the Cape. 3 minutes into the flight, we're 50 miles high and about 10 miles downrange. Three minutes, 25 seconds. We have verified that the tower has jettisoned. The crew has verified the tower is jettisoned.
That's the launch escape tower, which if there had been a disastrous explosion
Frank
before
Borman
this,
says
would have pulled
staging
the
was
spacecraft
smooth, and
free.
he says the ride now is even smoother.
When the spacecraft, when the launch escape system jettisoned, it pulled away the cover which had covered the command module to protect it from the 1,200-degree heat of this escape
Coming
from
up
the Earth.
4 minutes into the flight, and the communication thus far has been excellent. It's been a little sparse, but it's been quite sharp and clear.
They're now a good 500 miles
70
downrange.
altitude and about 20 miles or more downrange.
They should be making 5,400
Correction,
miles
let's
an
make
hour.
that 200 miles downrange.
Yes, I think that's more likely. The next important event of the flight is the cutoff of the second stage engines. That comes 8 minutes and 40 seconds into the flight, or about 3 minutes, 4 minutes from now.
Gets an enthusiastic go from both trajectory and booster at 4 minutes 50 seconds into the flight.
It's been a beautiful takeoff. Everything apparently going sensationally well.
Mark 5 minutes.
The first really dangerous point of this flight has passed.
The crew's advisor, trajectory and guidance are looking good, and Frank Borman came back with a very chatty, "Thank you, Michael." He's talking to Michael Collins, who would be in the center seat today except for an operation several months ago. 5 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight.
Go to the animation. Bobby, but Walter.
If anything went amiss now, the
300
spacecraft
miles downrange. We're nearing 100 miles out. And everything looks just grand.
The spacecraft at this point could separate and come back in a normal re-entry. It is building up toward orbital speed now, and at this point should be at around...
Collins gives the crew another go on trajectory and guidance, which at this point are the most critical elements. It's 6 minutes, 10 seconds into the flight. Our downrange distance now 400 miles. Our velocity in feet per second, nearly 15,000 feet per second. We've achieved nearly 60% of the velocity required to make orbit. 57% right now.
Around 12,000 miles an hour.
And we're 96.5 miles above the Earth.
The orbital speed required to orbit the Earth to balance between the centrifugal force going on out into space and the gravity of Earth is 17,500 miles an hour. That's the speed that they must achieve to go into Earth orbit.
Surgeon reports he likes everything he sees. 7 minutes into the flight.
So
And we're nearing the second stage. Nearing the point where we will drop off the second stage and light the third stage.
this third stage engine lighting is a critical point.
Come at about 8 minutes and 40 odd seconds into the flight.
It is the third stage that must boost the spacecraft out into the translunar trajectory.
70% of the velocity required to attain orbit. Our present velocity is 18,600 feet per second, and we are 100 miles above the Earth, 100 even. 625 miles downrange.
If there's any doubt when this third stage fires that it is working properly, it could mean that the mission could not go on to the moon. That decision could be made at that point.
Coming up on 8 minutes, mark 8 minutes.
So they will be watching this third stage firing now in about 30 seconds from now very, very carefully. The third stage is
20,400 feet per second, 101.7 miles above the Earth, 734 miles downrange.
the third stage engines of J2 develops 230,000 pounds of thrust. Burns about 2.5 minutes to bring the vehicle to orbital speed and altitude. And this is the stage that has to reignite later for the translunar injection. Should be time for that staging right now.
And the crew is advised they look good on the ground for staging. And Borman says, same here. We got S2 cutoff. We got S4B ignition. The Borman confirmed S4B ignition.
So the third stage has ignited.
Good to us at 9 minutes into the flight.
That's the first step. Now if it develops its full power, they will confirm that the S4B is ready to be shut off.
We now have 89% of the velocity required. We're 920 miles downrange. And we're 9 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight.
This engine will be shut off in another minute and a half approximately, and then to be restarted.
Dynamics officer says our altitude is nominal, which is the typically conservative word for very nearly a perfect mission, as nearly as we can observe at this point. 9 minutes, 50 seconds, and we've just gone to what we call mode 4. If any trouble should develop now, we would go ahead and burn into orbit with our service propulsion engine. The crew is now being advised we plan to cut off the third stage engine at 11 minutes, 28 seconds into the flight. We're now at 10 minutes, 10 seconds. We're at 103.7 nautical miles above the Earth. Our velocity is at an even 24,000 feet per second, which is just very, very close to orbital velocity. That's 95% of it. And we're 1,200 miles downrange. So it put us out a little bit east of Bermuda.
If that third stage should not function properly, and they did use the service propulsion system, that's a 20,500-pound thrust engine, to go into orbit, it would mean that they would not refire for the lunar trip.
How do you read Houston? And he gets a looking good back from a looking good comment from Mike Collins. Minutes, 20 seconds.
That third stage cutoff should come any second now.
And we're hearing a little something from Jim Lovell reporting a reading on one of his many gauges. We have SECO, says Frank Borman. SECO, and I would call it 11 minutes 30 seconds.
That's the engine cutoff.
That will be an estimate. 11 minutes 30 seconds. Our launch digital data shows our velocity now 25,577 feet per second. The data now has been reduced, and we show an altitude of 102.5. And the crew has been given a go for orbit, and they responded enthusiastically that they too, in fact, were go.
So they've got a go for orbit. They're half a mile off of their planned 103-mile orbit at 102.5 miles. Not significant at all. They're a few miles an hour slower than their planned 17,500 velocity for orbit. Not significant at all. This flight of Apollo 8 in its first stages has gone exceedingly well, and it augurs well for the remainder of the flight.
Jim just read us down what he saw on his instrumentation. He shows an apogee of 102.6, a perigee of 96.8, and a cutoff velocity of 25,560 feet per second. That's within hundredths of a percentage point of what we were reading on our scales here in Houston.
So now, for the next, testing out their spacecraft systems, their communications, their computers, their various thrusters on their attitude control, and if all these things seem to be working well, and now they apparently have a good third stage there, they will decide in the next 2 hours whether or not to go for the moon. If so, they will fire those engines 2 hours and 55 minutes after the takeoff, or in other words, at about 9:45 Eastern Time this morning. CBS News color coverage of the flight of Apollo 8 will continue in a moment.